I just pretend I'm busy to keep the hype up. But my bad. I've been pretty back in engagement, but it's always good to be back at HRC. This will always be my church, because this was where I got to serve with the Bune and with all of you. So thank you for having me back. And then the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I got nervous about choosing this topic because I'm always worried people will think it's like a plug for confession. Come confess, come confess. But it's actually stemming more from like a bigger issue that I feel like I'm seeing on the field in everything. Like from people dealing with doubt, like with what their source of their doubt is, a lot of the time it's not well-founded, right? It's actually completely understandable, right? But what was being taught was already wrong, right? So it's like, well, who taught you this or who said this? And all the times it came from a Christian source, right? And so I'll be putting myself in their place and like, well, they're justified in having a problem with Christianity if they hear something like this. I would too, if I were to hear something like this. And even more worrisome, I guess, is that we're in a society and a culture of like DIY stores, right? Everything is do-it-yourself. So we have a culture of, what's up, Doug? We have a culture already of self-direction, of self-guidance. So I really, really suck at talks because I'm used to more of a discussion style. So I have random headers and I don't even know if they join together. So like, feel free to throw out like questions or out, however you say it. I still haven't lost the Canadianness. Feel free to throw out comments or questions or rebuttals or whatever, because I'm not sure where it's going to go. So the first verse that should scare people is the words of Christ, where he says, leave them alone, let them alone. They are blind guides. And if a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall in a pit, right? It's that simple. So discipleship is absolutely necessary in life. In fact, God himself established a system of discipleship in that he didn't create Adam and Eve and give them full knowledge, right? Like they weren't like spontaneously like filled with knowledge of everything, right? They were growing together. In fact, even like we talked about in another talk, some of the fathers meditate and say, well, the tree even was going to be eaten from at some point, but that they were to grow in knowledge with God, that God was going to hand them knowledge as it is appropriate at the right time, right? You don't have to look very far. No one like this little girl right here, right? She's not going to be 4. Okay, listen up. Okay, when you're 15, you got to do this and you got to have this, and don't talk to boys right now, and don't like. There's a time and a place and a phase. Everything is gradual. We don't know everything all at once. So God established that in the design of nature, whatever the means were of that nature. I'm trying to speak clearly so Gigi doesn't yell at me. So he also could have said, okay, I've written the law on your hearts and I've written you the code in your hearts and you don't need anything. But instead it says that God gave them the law and the prophets, right? He gave them 2 different means to learn. One was a written instruction that has the ideals to say, okay, this is what perfection looks like. And if you live this, you're going to learn and you're going to understand. And he also gave them holy people, right? Of giving them the prophets, of saying, okay, well, here are the people that we show you as an example. That these are, because I'm interacting with them, that's some indication to you that this is good, right? Because God is not going to talk to something that is wrong. He's not going to use the sorcerer and say, yeah, I like this sorcerer, right? If God was dealing with the sorcerer, then it means that he likes sorcery, right? So he doesn't deal with that. So anyone who we see God clearly working with, we can take as an idea that, okay, something about what he is doing or she is doing is right, right? And then that's worth emulating. And then that's a person to whom I can go and ask to say, how do I do this? Or how do I be like this, right? So these are the 2 ways. So he put it in the law and he put the prophets. And then he even assigned priests. Like there were no priests. That nobody had a concept of priests. I don't mean in civilization. I mean among the Israelites, right? Is that God said, no, I want you to have priests. Okay, this tribe will be the priests, right? And before that, right, we had the judges, right? We saw that Moses was put in charge of the people. He was elected by God. Moses really clearly didn't even want the job, right? He tried to run. And then God said, no, I'm gonna tell you what to do. And so Moses' job was to sit with the people and hear their issues and discern right from wrong, right? And it says that the work got to be so big, right, that actually his father-in-law is like, dude, you can't handle this, you need help, right? And so then they appoint the 70 under him, which are a prototype of the 70 later, to divide the work. And they're like, okay, well then the big issues will send up the ladder of whatever it's called and send it to the big honcho. So there was in there a sense of discipleship, and then they had a series of judges, right? And then after the judges were the kings. And one of the roles of the kings was also to judge, not just to judge like legal issues, but to judge right from wrong, because they were seen to have a grace from God, right, in their anointing, that they would be able to discern. Obviously, it didn't always go well. We had many kings that sucked. But when those that remained devout, they had that spirit of discernment, like Solomon, right? Despite his fall, he had wisdom that was given to him from on high. It wasn't his own wisdom that he attained. It was a gift. So there are obviously benefits to discipleship. And then even, like our Lord, when he came, he chose 12, right? That he highly trained, right? And then he had 70 that were at another level, like they were an association, right? And then those people discipled other people. And so we know Saint Ignatius, for example, was the disciple of Saint John, the apostle, right? There's all these different people who received from somebody else. But even then, Christ very intentionally had people, trained them, taught them, that even to the point that even after his resurrection, he wasn't like, hey, peace out, folks, I'm going up to the Father, right? He's like, okay, now I need to teach you even more, okay? You weren't going to understand it while I was alive. Now you need to know what certain things meant, right? This meant this. I did this because of this. This prophecy was talking about me in this way. So that the apostles, when they would preach, had substance, right? They weren't just speaking of their own. So I want to ask like random questions to try and get into the spirit of discipleship so we can define it. They're cheesy, but so what? So simple question, why would a person go to the gym? Why do people go to the gym?
To get fit.
To get fit. Why do they want to get fit?
To get healthy.
Okay, to get healthy. That's what I was looking for. Obviously, there's some people who just want a six-pack or whatever, but like, there's a decent number that care about like the health aspect. Okay, so the concept is health, right? So we need to understand that discipleship has a point, right? So a person isn't going to the gym because they have like an interest in moving objects, right? Or being like, oh, I want to lift things up and down and that brings me great joy, right? Like I have the vision of good health, so I want good health, so I'm going to go. There might be other perks too, right? That maybe it's cool that you have great biceps, but there's also a concept of health, right? So a person who wants to seek discipleship has to want a spiritual life, okay? Like there has to be that inner disposition towards the goal, right? If you don't want that, then why go? Right? Like, what would be the point? Is saying, oh, well, like, it's cool, I get to say random words at some God? Like, that's not cool either, right? There should be a sense of, there's this thing that I want, which is spiritual health, which is holiness, right? Is the image and likeness, as we've talked about a lot. But there's something in mind. We don't just go at random, right? So the person who's going, because this affects what you get out of your discipleship, right? If this is random, that you just hiring somebody to order you around, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Like there has to be an end goal in mind. So for the person who's going, even no matter what state they are in health-wise, there's a vision of good health, right? That's what they want to attain. So if I want to lose weight and be muscular, how do I do it? Okay, the person who walks into the gym is like, okay, I want to get fit. What do? They walk into the building, then what? Exercise? Okay. What else? Personal trainer. Excellent. What else might they do? They walked in. They've never been in a gym their whole entire lives. Sorry?
Buy membership.
Buy membership. True. Okay.
Watch what other
Watch what other people are doing. Excellent. Very good. Actually, I did that. What else?
Explore the different machines and tools and get to see what's available for.
Good. What else? Like, there's no wrong answer. Like, what do? You just walked in. Like, we've all done that at some point. Well, most of us. Commit. Choose the easiest machine. Absolutely. Right. Like, there's sources of knowledge. Right. If you just walk in, it's overwhelming, right? So the personal trainer, perfect, is specifically what we're going to zoom in on today, right? The personal trainer is one, right? You're going to go to the machines, you're going to find out which one's the easiest, you're going to be committed, you have to buy a membership, right? We've all bought membership, we're all baptized, okay? So we have a membership, thank God, right? But then it's like, okay, well, what do I do? It's overwhelming. You need a source of information, right? Like, everybody needs a source of information. So, like, I don't understand today why everybody thinks that they can do things on their own. You need to get something, right? You're going to go up to the machine, read the card, right? I will never forget, like, I was fit at some point in my life, right? Like, the very first time that actually, I'll save that story for later with things that can go wrong. But you need a source of information. Maybe it's a manual, maybe it's the machine. So our sources of knowledge in the church, there's many. Right? You might go to a book, right? Somebody might get online and say, okay, well, how do I lose weight? And they're like, oh, count your calories, right? They got it from somewhere. So there's literature, right? Literature is one source. So we have sayings of the fathers, we have writings of the fathers, we have the text of the Holy Bible, of course, first and foremost, right? We have third-party writings, right, that are of benefit, that are of value. We have saints, right? Just like you guys said, you look at what everyone else is doing. That's what saints are, right? We're like, okay, who are these people who are doing it well, right? That guy looks fit. He's on that machine. He's not falling off. I want to do what that guy is doing, right? Like, that's not irrational. That's very rational, right? Is who's doing it well, right? I want to mimic him or her. So we have the saints. We have tradition, right? Like, where people don't like tradition, but everybody in the world is living off of tradition, whether they want to or not, okay? But we are, right? Where it's just like, when somebody says something bizarre, it's like, that sounds funny, right? If everybody becomes a new independent evaluator of knowledge, right, then we must have, like, everybody with an IQ of, like, 240 walking across it. We don't have that, right? Nobody knows everything. So we need to look at tradition to say, well, what in the whole body of tradition, what in the whole history of humanity, in the history of Christianity, what has worked, right? Like, what has gone well and what has clearly not gone well, right? And so we have another source, which is the tradition. We have the personal trainers, right, which are your spiritual fathers and mothers. And we have specialists, right? Like, you might go and hire yourself a specific person who's like, no, I'm a sports athlete trainer, right? I am, like, a trainer for those who have rheumatoid arthritis, right? We have specialties in everything. You may need to go to a specific specialist in different areas to say, oh, no, I have this particular problem. Maybe you're somebody who has, like, a major metabolic issue, and so the normal training isn't going to work, right? And so the guy that you normally would go to has no clue how to deal with you, right? So you need to go to some other person who has a specialization. So we do need a source of knowledge other than ourselves, okay? Because we tend to think very highly of ourselves. But we need to go to another source that's established and credible to do it. Next question. Your 2-year-old daughter has headaches all the time and is vomiting. What do you do? Sorry? Emergency. What else might you do?
Give her lots of water.
Lots of water? Okay, pretend you know nothing, right? You're not any of the many MDs in this church, and like you just have no clue. Your kid is clearly just sick, and you've never had a kid before. Very good. Call your mom. Excellent. Okay, that's a very good answer. What else might you do? Call 911 or call emergency. What are you gonna do? Why are you calling these people? Because you don't know, right? Like I really want to, if I'm going to hammer one point over and over, it's you don't know anything, okay? None of us know anything, but we all think we know everything, right? It's not just teenagers, it's adults too, right? We all think we know everything all the time, right? You need to choose somebody who knows, okay? Like you have to choose a guide, right? So in this case, when it's a child, are you going to go to just any doctor? Who are you going to go to? Right, you're gonna go to the pediatrician, right? Where it's like, no, I haven't had kids before, right? So I don't know, right? You can't just call up the random person and say, hey, kids vomiting, cool. Like, oh well, I read this book online and it was so good, and like I think you should bathe them in like cat food, right? Like you need to go to someone who is credible. Right? And so you need to go to the specialist, and the pediatrician is specifically trained to specifically deal with this issue. Right? So you need to choose a guide who demonstrates skill in what that person is teaching, right? And who also needs to have experience, right? Not every mom is going to be comfortable with the person who graduated last week, right? And it's almost like a toss-up. They're like, okay, well, the new person has all the new knowledge, but the old person has like the real experience, right? It's always that dilemma, right? Of like, which one do I go to? I'll go to the in-between, right? Like this person is a 4-year out grad, so I'll go to this person because like they've been out long enough to have reality set in, right? And these are rational thoughts. They're not wrong thoughts. They're good thoughts because we care. We're giving a sense of safety away to somebody. We're letting somebody take responsibility for something that we don't have control over, right? And that we really don't know about. So you do want to ask somebody that you can trust, right? Like that's a very rational, normal human thing to desire. Next question. You are assigned the task of filing all the medical records at your clinic. How do you go about doing this? You just got thousands of papers shoved in a shed, and they're like, file these. What do you do?
Ask someone who's done it before.
Excellent. Ask somebody who's done it before. We're seeing a trend here. And why would you ask them? What are you looking for?
Guidance.
Guidance? What else? That's good. Sorry? Right. A system. Right? Because not everything needs to be new. Right? We have this thing of like wanting to redesign things sometimes. But it's like, why not ask someone or somebody or people who have done this before and ask them, what did you do? What went well? What didn't go well? How do we have a system? Right? Because the experience of generations has taught us best practices. Right? Of saying, okay, well, we spent like 50 years doing this and it didn't work, right? I did this and this and this and this and I could never find what I was looking for. But as people developed their practices, right, like, oh yeah, this worked really good and this did not work really good, to get their experience. So then part B of that question is, after you've designed your system, a new student comes after you and wants to totally redo what you did. How do you feel about this? And how should the student go about it? You got the keener. He's like, no, I've got this.
Say no.
You might say no. If you say no, why are you saying no? And if you're saying yes, why you say yes? They don't know what they're doing. Quite possibly.
Well, is it already finished?
Yeah, it's already.
Or can we redo everything?
They want to just make it better.
Like test it, see if it's a good system.
How do you test it? I like this.
Well, you test it against what you already know, in a sense, and what is already out there, and go from there and see if it's viable in that sense. Does it make things easier, or does it make it worse?
Excellent. Any other thoughts, comments? You guys both took it exactly where I wanted to go, actually. Okay, this is the easiest talk ever. So, this student is an innovator, okay? So, in the church, we always are cautious around innovations, right? Of like when somebody comes in with something new, we ask, what is this? Okay, where does this fall? What are they doing? So there are some innovations where we are going to be like, absolutely not, no thank you, like come again, you can go somewhere else. There will be some of those where it's like, no, I have this great idea, I'm going to throw it up in the air, right? And then whatever lands in this pile will be this pile, right? It's like, what are you doing? Right? That doesn't make any sense. So like it's illogical. But it is also possible that somebody is saying something that is practical, right? But then we need a system to test against, which is exactly what you're saying, right? Of like, well, what is tried and true? What is this innovation? Where is it coming from? What is the motive behind it? What is going? Are you just here to show off, right? Or is there some merit to this? Is it both? Maybe you're showing off and there's merit, right? Like these are all possibilities, right? But we need to look at the whole system, and that's why, specifically in the Orthodox tradition is the key word, right? Is that it's just saying it's not because tradition is infallible, small t tradition infallible, okay, big T is doctrine, right? But that there are certain things that we could say, no, this isn't working. So for example, in the rites and rubrics of the church, there has been development, right? Like there are things that definitely changed over time where we're like, okay, this isn't working, do this, right? Liturgy has changed. Right, like even little things in liturgy that you look at, like when I'm going around in the sanctuary with the gospel, and then he just holds it up. It used to be that was the gospel that we read from, right? And so then that would be open, and the priest would read it from the front. And I was okay, this is getting practical, so we'll let the bishop do that. But for the rest of the time, we'll just have like a small thing, right? Or at least in the Coptic rite. So there are things that can change, right? Or even the way that we administer communion has changed over the years, saying, hey, this innovation is good, right? This is not a dogmatic issue. This is a practical issue. So we can revisit this, right? This is something that we can do. But we always are trying to check, is this in the same spirit of what we received or not? If it's not in the same spirit, right, then something is wrong. It scratches the wrong way. And so for this, you need to have knowledge, right? The only way to evaluate it is to know something. Otherwise, every new idea that comes in, it's like, yeah, sure, why not try it, right? And then it just becomes this randomness, right? And the randomness doesn't work, right? That's not what we're about, at least in the Orthodox tradition, is that we want to look at, even if you look at the fathers are always quoting the fathers. Like it's funny. Like when I was reading Saint Cyril, I was obsessed with Saint Cyril for a couple of years, right? Saint Cyril always be like, the fathers have never said this. The fathers, I'm like, you're the father, right? Like today when we talk about the fathers, we're talking about him, right? But he was like, no, Athanasius never said this, right? And he was like, we can all agree on Athanasius, and he didn't say this. And so he used it as referenced it a few times. If you haven't read it, you must read it. Dorotheus of Gaza, Discourses and Sayings. It's one of the best spiritual books like I've ever read in my life. And he's real. He's not like, you're not going to read him like, and thou shalt surely, like it's not a heavy read. He jokes around, he talks about indigestion, he talks about like weird monks, good monks, bad, like everything. And he's practical. If you haven't read it, read it. But even him, what you'll find constantly he's doing, he'll constantly be saying, the fathers said, we received in the monastery this. So that anything that's coming up that's new, he has a moral compass, right? He has a compass that kind of says, this sounds funny, right? Maybe it's okay, but let's leave it alone, or let's be super cautious, or let's do this and this and this. So we need to test any innovation against the tradition. And in the Orthodox tradition, we pretty much have three. Go for it.
Could you just repeat the title?
Dorotheus of Gaza, Discourses and Saying. It's from Cistercian Publications. He's a 5th century father, trained by Barsanuphi St. John, and was a father of monks in Palestine. And there's a whole section on Lent, actually. So when we have any innovation in our church, we test it against 3 things. Okay? The Bible, right? Is this consistent with the teachings of Scripture? Number 2, the tradition of the fathers, okay, and mothers of the desert and the patristic fathers, and liturgy. Liturgy for us is huge, because liturgy preserves the whole teaching of the church, right? Anything in our divine liturgy cannot be at odds with what we teach. Like it cannot be. If it is, we have a serious problem, right? So those 3 are sources of tradition: is Bible, tradition of the fathers, and liturgy. If something is in disagreement with those things in the life of the church, we tend to push it away. Either to reject it completely or just say, well, we don't want to have anything to do with it. It doesn't look safe. Okay? It doesn't mean that anything that we don't do is necessarily wrong. It just means it hasn't been part of our tradition and we tend to stay away from it. A better safe than sorry kind of thought process, which I think is a healthy one, right? Most parents are not like, oh, that sounds cool, we'll try it with their kids, right? They're not. If it's something that could potentially harm their kids, they're like, you know what, maybe it's not bad, I don't know enough about it yet to say something, so you're not doing it. Let Billy do that, you're not, right? But like we need to know where we're getting stuff from. Number 4, your spouse tells you she can't handle how friendly you are with other women. What do you do? Alter your behavior. Any other ideas? And after him saying that, I don't know. Very good. Like, we're going to come to some certain characteristics. If there's not self-denial, okay, then you're not going to grow. Right? If everybody is looking over only what do I want, what makes me comfortable, what is my will, good luck. Like, really, really good luck. I mean, even look at your own children, look at your friends. When there's a disagreement, what happens? Right? If every time there's a disagreement, everybody insists on always being the right person, how will there ever be peace? How will there ever be growth? How will there ever be any kind of development? Right? There has to be a denial of will, and we're going to get more specifically into that in a little bit. Okay, you wish to start a new business of selling sponges. What do you do? Sorry? Advertise? Find a supplier? Research is buzzing around in multiple places. Research. Okay, what else would you do? What kind of work is involved in research?
Check out your competitors.
Okay, competitors. Sorry? Lender, okay.
Get educated on how to run a business.
Excellent. Getting educated.
Try different ones. Or is this an invention for the first time? Oh, first question. Yeah.
Is sponges even a good idea? Right. So, like, imagine if a person just gets like, yeah, I'm gonna do a business. Cool. Like, how do you go about doing that? Like you all said, you need to research. Is there a market for this? Does that even make sense? Has it already been done? Does anybody use sponges anymore? Right? Like maybe they're not using sponges anymore. Right? Is there like how do I even get a lender? Is that gonna work? Like you don't just get up and do something. Like nobody in this society just gets up and does that, right? It requires you to actually, if anybody did, they'd be like, wow, that person was naive, right? If that person just gets up, registers a business, buys 50,000 sponges online, and then like pays to do a website, and then it fails, are most people going to be sympathetic? They might be sympathetic to their financial loss, but they're like, well, what were you thinking of selling sponges, right? Did you ask anybody? Like, did you get advice? Did you do that market research? Did you know? Like, people are going to be like, well, what's wrong with you? Like the sponge business. Like, no, I could have told you that, right? So, I'm gonna maybe cut short the questions. The point is very clear. If even in secular things, you need to ask, then what baffles me today is why Christians don't think they need to learn how to be Christians. Like I'm like this is why like I was interested in this topic, is that we think we know how to be Christians. But you don't. None of us do. Right? You don't become a Christian by having a label on you. Right? Like does that make you culturally a Christian? Like if you have that title, Christian, right? Is it by the act of baptism that you're a Christian? Is it by like accepting Jesus as your personal savior, as in some traditions? Like, what is it that makes a person a Christian? Like, if it's just titles, then it's easy, right, then anybody can get it. You can buy one online. We can all be doctors and priests and pastors if you like, right? But if we, even in the secular, know that we need to ask questions, then you need to understand even more so for Christianity that it's necessary, right? This is why Christ said, learn from me, for I am meek and lowly of spirit, right? He said, like, look at my example. If you want to know what it means to be one of my followers, then look at me, watch me, right? And he said, if you want to be mine, take up your cross, follow me, right? Like, there are certain characteristics. So you need to have a guide. Okay, I want to specifically zoom in on the concept of a spiritual guide today, right? Because discipleship, there are books and books and books and books and books about this. So like this talk is a very, very bird's eye view. Like I have at least like 8 on my shelf about it, like, and they're all really good, right? Like there's so many different areas of discipleship to talk about. So I really just wanted to zoom out. But you need to have that personal trainer. If you just walk into the gym, you're not going to necessarily make it very far. You might get some progress, right? You might, just by reading the machines, be able to do a little bit. That's true, right? Just like if you just read the Bible, yes, you will see some good things by doing it, right? Just like a person who eats healthily but doesn't know he's eating in a healthy way will have benefits, right? That doesn't mean he's going to progress, but it also might help them. So I'm not saying that without a guide you're going to definitely die, but without a guide you could die. Like, it is also a possibility. But we do need to have somebody who teaches us. And it needs to be a person who knows you and your personality. Right? Like the person who, I'm gonna be, like I said, all over the place, and I might accidentally be redundant, so I'm sorry in advance. But you need to go and find somebody. Look at St. Peter, for example. St. Peter was forlorn and upset that it was him who denied Christ, right? That's not an easy thing to deal with, right? Peter is this really headstrong person who always just like, he had no filter. Like he just boom, 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 whatever came to his mind just shot off his tongue, right? So he's the dude who's like, oh, no, you must not die. Oh, you are Christ, Son of God. And he's always like passionate, right? That's his personality. And Christ knew that about him, right? So Christ, knowing his personality, knew, okay, this is how this person is. So after the resurrection, Christ pulls him aside, right? All of the apostles ran away, right? Like they all could have felt guilty. It's not like any of them were super duper, except John, right? Who is Jesus' pet, right? In the view of the apostles, right? It's like, yeah, but that's John, right? But like for the rest of them, they all denied him in some form. Right, but Christ, knowing Peter specifically, right, says, no, I know this is going to be weighing really heavily on him, right? Especially he's the oldest, right? They see him as like the head honcho, right? That's why we say Peter foremost among the apostles, right? So he pulls him aside and says, no, I know that you need this. And it gives him that comfort, even though Peter starts crying, right? Like Peter breaks down by the 3rd time, and he's like, Lord, you know, right? Like he can't deal with it. What does Christ do? Like, who would have thought that this was the solution? Right? Christ is like, serve me. Feed my sheep. Right? I'm putting you in charge. Somebody else who doesn't know Peter would have been like, la. No. You need a timeout, Habibi. Right? You need to sit down, sit with yourself. Right? You messed up. Right? When you're ready, we're going to send you out in the field, but not now. Right? But no, Christ knows who this is. He knows what he really meant. He knew the heart and the intention of Peter, right? And so he knows, no, not for this person. I specifically know that what Peter needs is this, right? And then Peter right away becomes Peter again. Right away. He's like, what about that guy? Right? Like a minute ago he was crying, right? And I was thinking about, what about John, that guy that's following behind? What about him? He's like, what does that have anything to do with you? Right? Like right away they're back to normal with him just talking smack, and Christ putting him in his place, right? And relationship restored, right? But you need a person who knows you like that, like who can get to know you like that knows your nuances, that knows what makes you tick, right? And that you can have a history with, that you can say, okay, no, you know that I'm like this, you know that I'm I had that with my priest in Canada, right? I could say 2 words to him, and he would know what I didn't say. Right, we're like, you're hiding this. Yeah, guilty, right? And I didn't mind that. We had like there's that history that was there. Or even Father Lazarus in Egypt, like that. I'm free riding off of his fame right now, but he's known me for 17, 18 years now, right? So like he could, as an outside observer, look at me, right, when I was having like weird spiritual phases where I'm like just in a plateau. You're like, Mina, you are a nature boy. He was like, you thrive in nature. You've always been alive and you're doing hiking and canoeing and kayaking and having a cabin and doing all this. You just come alive. You need to get out of where you are. You need this. And for me, that's dead on. It wasn't something crazy for me. Anybody who knew me before knew that was normal to me, right? But that outside eye who knows me, right, where there's a history, was able to say, get out of there, right? Your spot is this, right? You need to choose a person who knows you and your personality, right? And that's something that can be developed. Having a spiritual guide protects you from harm. Okay, there's a very famous story among the Desert Fathers. And when it comes to spiritual guidance and spiritual growth, we always go to the Desert Fathers. Like they are the gurus, right? They're the starets, as the Russians say. For us, the sheikh, the elder, the abba, right? That's the desert tradition. There's a very famous story of a disciple who was a novice monk, or a young monk, and his spiritual father asked him to go to the city to do some errands. And so the disciple was petrified. Because he was like, I know my weaknesses. If I see a girl, like I'm going for the girl, right? And he was honest about those weaknesses. But the Abba still told him to do it, right? But by doing it under obedience, by doing it under the direction of the Abba, when he went, he did find, in fact, a girl soliciting him. And he freaked out, right? He's like, oh my gosh. And then so he cries out and says, oh God, by the prayers of my Abba, save me. And immediately he found himself on the road back to the monastery. Right? So, and the point of the story is to say, in submitting to this elder, right, he's protected from harm. By allowing somebody to kind of cover you, then it works. Just like with a personal trainer, right? The person who is like, I want you to start doing this and this and this and this, right? The trainee that wants to be an Olympian might think that it's insane, right? He might think, look, there's no way I can handle that, right? But by submitting himself to this other person, right? That person carries some of that responsibility. Where it's like, don't worry about that, I've got it covered, right? Where sometimes even a spiritual father might say, I want you to do this. And it's like, oh, but Abuna so-and-so might get mad at me. Don't worry about it, I'll cover you, right? I'll take that, I'll be the bad guy. Which we do sometimes, right? There are sometimes I'll tell somebody, I'll be your bad guy. Blame it completely on me, don't worry about me. Like, I'm willing to be that. And my priest, I learned that from my priest, right? Because my priest did that, right? Like, one time I was bombing, like, school because I was all gung-ho Jesus, right? And I'm going to do this much service and I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. And I bombed, right? And so my priest was like, you're not allowed to serve next year. Like, oh, but Abuna this, and the servants will think about me. He's like, blame me. And he was like, but you need to grow in this. It's not okay for me that you're an example to my kids and you're flunking. That's not acceptable. Right? And he goes, so don't worry what they're going to say about you. I will be the cause. I will take it, but I don't want you to lose this, and this, and this. Right? So we get a certain amount of protection from harm, right? When we have somebody responsible for us. As the book of Proverbs says, those who have no guidance fall like leaves, but there is safety in much counsel, right? Like you can put yourself in there. The other reason to get a guide is because we trust ourselves, right? Abba Dorotheos, from that book, he said, no one is more wretched, no one is more easily caught unawares than a man who has no one to guide him along the road to God. Those are strong words, right? Like, he actually has stronger words for a person who's unguided than for people who fornicate and people who whatever, all the stuff that we think is so awful. But he's like, no, the unguided person is far worse than all of them. See, we think we're well-intended, but our knowledge is severely limited. We don't even know what we don't know, right? Anybody who's developed an expertise in something, I hope, would have come to the realization of, wow, I really don't know anything, right? Like, the more that I would specialize in one particular branch in my field, I'm like, wow, there's so much more here. I didn't even know that I didn't know this, right? And then this is its own field, and this is its own field. So we might be very well intended, okay, but again, our knowledge is limited. And the devil is going to abuse your weakness and the weaknesses of others, right? Like that's a fact. He's not going to sit there and be like, oh, I'm so happy for you, you're progressing towards God. He is like, I'm going to take that guy down. I'm going to take her down, right? He's not sitting there like clapping for us. He hates us, right? And if he knows how to make this person's weakness like synergize with this person's weakness, he will do it, because that's how you bring people down. In particular, what I'm thinking of is that I just feel, I just think, that kind of mentality, right? Which we hear all the time. I just think that if I were to do this, it would be good, or if you just leave me alone for this, like I know, like just like it means nothing, right? You just like don't know anything, okay? But we all just like think we do. So if we don't realize that, we are that blind person leading the blind, right? And we are that person who thinks that we know something, and we're actually potentially putting other people in danger, right? And there are so many examples that I've seen over and over and over and over, and just history repeats itself a zillion times, that we have to recognize that we don't know everything, and we should be okay with that. Like, I don't know why people are very offended by that fact, right? Like, people get very defensive when their ignorance is exposed to them, and I don't know why. Like, an intelligent person will recognize their lack of knowledge, right? Like, that should be a good thing. In fact, even like any healthcare professional is scared to talk about something they don't know about because they're so liable, right? Where even if they know, they're like, it's not mine. Go talk to that person, right? Because they don't want to accept responsibility for something that they don't know. Why? Because they don't want to harm someone, right? So we need to recognize that. Like, there's nothing, it doesn't make you a worse person to acknowledge that you have deficiencies, right? You are not the incarnate Son of God. None of us are. There's only one. Okay? So we are all going to have deficiency. We need to know it. Now, the Virgin Mary accepted things that made no sense, right? Like, the whole concept of having a baby without knowing a man makes no sense, right? And she articulated as much, right? She said to the angel, cool, no problem. I just want to point out, like, this fact that I'm not married, right? You know that? Right? Yes? Okay? Good. Right? That was end of story. She didn't argue. She didn't say anything. It's like, as long as you're aware, like, that's cool. I accept. Right? And what came from it? Our salvation. Right? Like, this submission, right, brought forth the Savior of the whole world. Right? Joseph, the same thing. Right? When the angel comes to St. Joseph and says, yo, go to Egypt. Right? I can only imagine what he's thinking. Are you serious? First you're saying virgin birth, right? And I'm the one who looks like horrible, right? And now you're saying go to Egypt. I don't speak Egyptian, right? I don't have any money. I'm poor, right? How does it, like, this is illogical, right? Imagine someone coming like, hey, immigrate to Lithuania. What? Right? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? And yet, right, God worked wonders from it, right? There is a benefit to it. God isn't asking us not to think, right? And he's not even angry when we articulate our objections or our concerns, right? But there is a necessity to trust, right? Even Abraham, right? Of whom, like, you see the verse where it says, and God saw the faith of Abraham and counted it for him as righteousness. 3 verses later, Abraham's like, so when's the promise coming true? Right? Like, that's not the archetype of faith that you would think. Yet God didn't get angry. He's like, yeah, I'm going to. Right? So having doubts is not the issue, right? But it's about, do you continue to do it in spite of? Do you accept or not? Because you have to put the trust, it's an act of faith to put into another person, again, whom you trust, right? Like, I know, like, just as an example, like, if a person does things without guidance, without knowing stuff, danger can happen, even among clergy. Right? I know of a clergyman who is unaware that one of his youth is an atheist. Right? The person's going through doubt. No problem. But he wanted to put him in charge of a particular service that couldn't have been the worst one to put him in. Where it's just like, no. Like, you're going to harm him and everybody. Right? Like, are there politics in church? Yes, there are. It's a fact of life. Wherever there are humans, there are politics. There's going to be problems. Right? So if somebody is struggling with that problem, don't throw them in the middle of the problem. right? Like if somebody is struggling with a sin, don't throw them in the middle of the sin, right? If somebody is struggling with celibacy, don't make him be the sole male living among 40 nuns. That's illogical, right? If somebody's struggling with same-sex attraction, don't have him to sleep over with 40 guys, right? You need to be aware of the struggle, right? There needs to be a certain amount of wisdom. And it's not a judgment of the person, it's about understanding everybody's weaknesses and everybody's strengths, both, right? And so we can't trust ourselves and our thoughts and our ideas. Because was the idea of this priest good? Absolutely it was. It's a very nice idea to give somebody responsibility. It's really nice, right? It's nice to feel trusted. So of course he had great intentions, right? It just happens that in this particular case, it might not have been the right decision, right? Or another servant who wants to start a new service without consulting, doesn't know any background, right? Doesn't know that he's entering a zone where like there's a major family history of fighting. I said, no, I'm going to get this family and this family. We're going to start this new service and this new church. It's like, that'll be World War III, right? But it's like to him, it's like, oh, it's for Jesus. It's good. New church. Wonderful, right? Good idea? Yes. Noble idea? Yes. Loving idea? Yes. Smart idea? No. Okay? Because there's a lack of knowledge, right? Just a simple lack of knowledge, right, can change everything, especially with how emotional we are. That's what I mean, the whole I just yada, 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 right? If a person that I care for deeply, if I ignore them for a whole week, no answering texts, shouldn't use that example, I'm really bad at that. But I ignore for a whole week, right? And then the person is furious, right? And they have all these emotions, right? And then they come to me like, oh, I was in the hospital for the whole week. That simple new fact changes a person's rage to compassion, guilt, right? They're like, oh man, and I was being so mean, and I said this and this and this and this and blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, I almost died, man, right? But if we base things on emotions are so temporal, right? They're uninformed, and our society is all about emotion, right? Like everything is about feelings these days. Right, like nonstop. Like I'm so sick of feelings. Like even my own. Right, we all have feelings, all of us, myself included. Right, but we give feelings way more weight than they deserve. Right, like we give them this weight as though like they're so right. Right, I just feel great, or I don't feel. Like both of them now have equal weight. Right, like I don't feel this anymore. And it's like, so what? Right? Like you're not going to always have those feelings, right? Like ask a married couple, do they still have the same butterflies in their stomach 10 years later? I don't know. Most people that I met don't. Does that mean that they don't love each other? No, it doesn't, right? Love is about self-denial. It's not about whether or not I get so excited every time like they text me, right? Like oh my gosh, she's coming home at 5 today. Just like yesterday and the day before and the day before and the last 5 years, right? But like, if that's the expectation, like, have fun, good luck. Like, you're going to hit a brick wall. And if that becomes your reason to divorce, that you don't have that lovey-dovey, like 5 years later about texting, say, I'm coming home for dinner, right? You're going to get divorced many times, right? Because you're going to eventually run into that same issue at some point, right? So you need to understand that you shouldn't trust yourself, and that your emotions, they're nice, but they're also irrelevant most of the time. Okay? Emotions are important. I'm not undermining them completely. I'm not saying discard your emotions. We are emotional people, and God created us that way. So there is a good use to our emotions. Just not to give them more weight than they deserve, and to recognize their limitations. That not knowing things affects things, and that's why a guide on the outside is somebody who can see you in a non-emotional way while understanding your emotions, right? Like you need that balance. Somebody who can say, I get that you feel this way, but it's going to come to an end, and this is the right thing to do in spite of your emotions. So like, trust me on this one. Yes, it feels like crap right now. However, it's going to pass. Right? This is a necessary time. Just like it sucks to wake up at 4 a.m. because you're going to go to the gym before work. Just like going for a run sometimes sucks. Right? Just like having that pain the day after the workout is painful but worth it. Right? Yes, those are real feelings. Yes, you do dread going. However, the end result is good health. Right? Bringing it back to, do I even want that? Right? Do I want that health or not? With discipleship, we sometimes get ashamed to admit our own weaknesses. I'm going to read you a story from that book from Dorotheus of Gaza that he's talking about with St. Macarius, and why you need a guide. I'll paraphrase it because it's a famous one that most people have heard. So there's Dorotheus saying, take a look at that brother whom the evil one that the devil loved, and that the devil goes to Abba Macarius and says, I have one brother who when he sees me changes like the wind. So the devil's boasting to St. Macarius that there's this one monk that is like buddy with him. So Dorothea says, such people like that change with the wind, the devil loves, and he always rejoices over them. The ungoverned, right? The ones who have nobody to give them any instruction. Those who are not subject to one who has power under God to help them and to give them a hand. Did not that cunning demon, whom the holy man saw carrying his savory drinks in little flasks, which he's referring to the temptation of the devil, he's calling them savory little like shots, go after all the brothers? Did he not offer drinks to all alike? But all of them ran and made known their thoughts to the Abba. So most of the monks, when the devil came offering them these shots, offering them these temptations, they ran to their spiritual fathers and said, hey, this is the problem that I'm having. And so they found help in time of temptation, with the result that the devil was powerless against them. But the devil found this miserable brother depending on his own strength and having nobody to support him, and he made a plaything of him. And he went off congratulating himself and raging against the others. But he was careless when he told, the devil was careless when he told Abba Macarius about it, and gave away to him the brother's name. So the holy man, Abba Macarius, runs to that monk quickly and found that this very thing was the cause of his undoing. He found him unwilling to talk about his problems. He found that he had not formed the habit of revealing his inner thoughts, and for this reason the enemy was twisting him around his little finger. Being asked by the Holy Father, how are things with you? He would say, thanks to your prayers, I am quite all right. And again persuaded him to speak out about himself. And so he spoke the word of God to him and guided him back to the right way using his skill. If you read the story from a different account, actually what Macarius did with him was really, really loving. Macarius is very famous for covering the weaknesses of others. That's what he's famous for. So Macarius said to him, he's like, oh, you don't find yourself struggling with fornication? And he's like, no, I'm fine. So Macarius is like, oh, you're lucky. Even me in my old age, I'm still struggling with fornication. So then the monk was like, oh, well, sometimes actually I have that too, right? And he's like, well, what about like this? And he's like, oh, no. And he's like, really? I do, all the time. I even do this and this and this. He's like, yeah, I do that too. You're right, right? And so he's like, when Dorotheus was saying with great skill, it really was with great skill. Like he was legit. And so he guided him back to the right way. Then the enemy came again, according to his habit, desiring to strike him down. He's talking about that monk again, and make him act shamefully. He found him stiffened up and no longer biddable, no longer like willing to do like what he was pitching to him. He departed at last without success. He departed and put to shame, and by this very brother whom he owned before. And so when he was again asked by the saint, so now Macarius is teasing him, right? Macarius is like, how's your friend? He no longer called him friend, but enemy, and cursed him, saying, even he has turned away from me, and I can no longer influence him. He has become more savage to me than all the rest. Right? This is the benefit of a guide, right? Is that we might be ashamed to admit our weakness, but when there's somebody who can bring it out of us, right? And my priest was incredible at this, right? Like when I would sometimes he was sarcastic. Like one time I was like, yeah, I have these thoughts, like, yeah, I had those too, but I was 5. But he could joke. But there are other times where he would say to me, he's like, no. Like I went through this, and I bet you feel this, and this, and this. I'm like, that is exactly what I feel. And he's like, yes, I'm a human too. I fell in that before. And he's not lying to me. He's not Macarius, right? Like he was like what Macarius did in his past, right? But the guide is able, because they should have experience, be able to say, yeah, I know what that's like. I have had those doubts. I have had those fears. I did fall in that sin, right? This is why, like, theoretically, when we choose clergy, we're choosing people who are experienced, right? We're not choosing somebody who's born yesterday, hopefully, right? Like, we want people who are exemplary. So you need the outside observer, because we might be ashamed to admit our weaknesses, and because of it, be dying spiritually. Like this monk was dying, right? The monk, like it says, he was a plaything of the devil. He was the devil's toy, right? And the devil was so proud of his accomplishment, and yet this monk, he's a monk, right? Anybody coming from the world like, oh wow, monk, right? Living on his own, right? There's even a story of Saint Bishoy, Saint Paisios, in the Western translation or Greek translation of his name, where a person wants to live as a hermit, and Paisios told him no. Saint Bishoy told him no. It's not. You're not ready for this. And he's like, no, I'm ready. So he's like, do whatever you want. So he went, and he come back to visit Saint Bishoy, and he goes, oh, pray for me. The devil is fighting me, and I am so aggrieved. And so Saint Bishoy was like, okay. So he prayed for him, and then the devil comes to him and goes, I didn't even know he was there. He goes, it's not me, right? He goes, I'm not the one fighting him, but now I know where he is, right? So, but the monk thought he was, but really the monk was battling his own will, right? So he could have the image. Anybody who were to visit would think, oh wow, hermit living alone, right? Like must be a saint, when really he was far from sainthood, right? And yet, like the reality of the matter was he was deceived, right? By his own self, not even by the devil, right? But if there wasn't this elder, this Abba with vision, right, there wouldn't be somebody who knows that. So there's a necessity for this third party. I'm gonna skip to, because I think I definitely was redundant. I'm sorry this is taking so long. What your duties are, and come back up to a few other, because I think it naturally lends itself. Your duty as a Christian or as an Orthodox Christian is, number one, you need to choose an Abba, right? Like all this has had an assumption that you chose somebody, like a spiritual director. And I'm going to give you something that Saint Basil said in one of his letters. It was to a monk, but it applies to us as well. He says, do not throw yourself away like a worthless vessel. On the contrary, with exceeding care and intelligence, okay, with your mind, find someone who walks before you unerringly on the path of your profession. So he's talking to a monk, but your profession as a Christian. One who is able to lead those who are on their way to God, who is adorned with virtues, who through his own works witnesses to the love of God, who has knowledge of the divine scriptures, someone who is not drawn hither and thither by distractions, who does not love money, does not meddle, is peaceful, a friend of God and of the humble, someone who is not angry or resentful, without vanity or pride, insensitive to flattery, not subject to inconstancy, someone who puts nothing above God. If you find such a person, surrender yourself to him, spewing out your own will and casting it far from you. These are heavy words, right? Very, very heavy words. Because you do not choose a spiritual guide carelessly, right? This is a very serious thing that you are embarking on, right? To be a Christian is a big deal, right? So it's not just like, oh yeah, he'll do, he's all right, right? No, you have a desire. If you wanted to go become an Olympian, you're not going to hire the guy at the 24/7 gym who works 2 a.m. to 7 a.m., right? You're going to be like, who's the guy with the reputation, right? Who trained, I don't remember his name, I'm not American, that guy, right? Like, who trained that guy? All right, if I can't get him, who has this and this and this and this, right? So does that mean that you always need the guy who trained Michael Phelps? No, it doesn't, right? But you do need to look for in the guide these traits, right? Like you want somebody, imagine if you have a trainer who's morbidly obese, right? Like, unless they have some clear reason for why they're morbidly obese, maybe it's a genetic issue and they're trying, okay, maybe, right? But how would you trust that person? Where it's it's not logical, right? I want to be skinny and you're not, right? So how do I do that? Like, you're clearly not the guide, right? If you're like, oh, I want to find somebody who can teach me patience, then you like choose the guy who's screaming and yelling at everybody, right? Bad idea, right? Because clearly he's not living it, right? So you have a responsibility to choose somebody who models the life that you want, okay? And when you have done that, you have to go to them with faith and submission, okay? And this is very hard. This is where most people struggle, right? Is that you need to do from under them what is asked of you, right? And this is a spiritual obedience, which is very hard for some people, right? Is that spiritual obedience does not mean cancel your mind, right? And the elder also respects the will of the person in front of them, okay? So I'm not saying this saying, come for your local brainwashing session at the Orthodox parish, okay? Because that's dangerous, right? Nobody should be brainwashing anybody, right? Nobody should be trying to force themselves to turn other people into little them, right? But I mean, these are duties, like priests get their own talks about spiritual guidance, or they should be anyway, about those things. But on your end, there needs to be spiritual obedience. You have to deny your will, right? One of the Desert Fathers says, the will of man is like a brass wall standing between God and man, right? The biggest obstacle for spiritual growth for most people is the will. It's what kills everybody. Because how on earth could you ever know the will of God if all you can hear is yourself? It's very simple. Is yourself. If you're the only one directing yourself, how on earth are you ever going to hear him? Because you have this sense of, no, I know this, I thought this, I feel, etc., like we talked about before, right? So it's like, no, I'm going to just try this. I'm going to just do this. Give me a chance with this. And imagine if the guy goes to the trainer and it's just like, no, your drills, I know they worked for that other guy, but I'm going to do this drill. It's like, do this drill. No, I'm not doing that drill. I want this drill. It's like, okay, I get it. You don't know. You chose me because I'm an expert. You don't get it. This is only going to work out this. I want you to have more than that. Yes, you might get strength from this, but you're not going to get endurance. And you need endurance right now. Your endurance sucks, right? That's the whole point. That's why you hired them, right? But if you're going to bring your own will constantly, right? A guide can only accommodate for so long with the person in front of them before enough is enough, right? I was talking to somebody earlier, and I never thought I would do this, but I had to fire somebody from confession. Like, where I'm just like, sorry, khalas, I can't handle this, right? I'm not angry, I don't dislike you, I don't think I'm better than you, but like everything that I say to you, you're angry about. Everything I say, you take defensively. Like, so if you're not interested, no problem at all. But don't hire me, right? Let's just be friends, right? And then you go your way, I go mine, we can get along great. Not because I'm angry, but if there isn't a sense of ownership as well to say, okay, well, what do I do, right? Everybody said to Christ, what do I do? What do I do to be saved, right? They'd go to the Alba of the desert and say, give me a word that I might live, right? If you don't live that because you have your own will in front of you, then that's a problem. If your issues with the trainer, no problem, right? But that's why I was saying, choose your trainer well. Because when you choose your trainer, then you need to listen to them, right? Like we see it all the time. Like some kid gets into a relationship and okay, stop talking. No, I just did one text. It's like, okay, deja vu, right? Over and over and over. And then you have the fake breakup and all blah, 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 blah. And it's not just you, there's older people too. And it's not condescension and it's not mockery and it's not saying you're an idiot and you're blah, blah, blah. It's because experience has shown over and over, like we talked about at the beginning, what is tried and true. What have we seen? What has worked? What has failed? It's coming from somewhere. There's a system, right? Like even the trainer comes from a system, right? And he's studied the philosophies, hopefully, to bring it from. So everything has to tie it from us so that we can be protected from deceit, right? That's important, right? Because your guide has discernment, or should have discernment if you chose him properly, right? Just like there's two famous stories of monks. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. The story of the monk who the angel appeared as the angel of God and said, Tubak, blessed are you, Father so-and-so. I have come because the Lord has found you so amazing, and yada, 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 right? And the monk's response, oh, I honestly think you have the wrong cell. The holy monk is beside me. Like, so you're one cell over. Just go to visit him, right? And from his humility, the devil was exposed and fled. But there's a story of another monk who an angel came and said, oh, you're so amazing. I'm going to pray with you. And he's like, wow, I'm so holy. The angels are praying with me, right? And he goes to his elder, right, and says, Abba, the angels are praying with me. And he goes, you're in big trouble, right? And he was like, my Abba is jealous. That was his response, right? And he's like, okay, you're so right, Abuna, you're so right. Goes back to his cell, and he was like, come back, you're good, right? Starts praying with him daily. What does he slowly start doing? Stops joining the community prayers, right? He stays in his cell. Then the monks started to get nervous. So the monks went to his cell. And they're like, Abuna, like, what's your problem? Come out, like, we miss you. Come pray with us. And he was like, it is better for me to pray and have words only for God, right? Words that sound so deep, right? Like, because they don't have discernment. He doesn't have discernment. So it came to the point where the angel says, you know what? You're so holy that God is actually going to do with you what he did with Elijah. So meet us at the wall next Tuesday at 6 during Tazbaha, and we're taking you straight to heaven. And he's like, amazing, right? Like, I am this second Elijah. Nobody since the Old Testament has reached this holiness. Goes out, stands on the monastery walls, as you've seen them, the high walls, right? Chariot of fire comes, jumps, takes the fall, almost dies on the spot. Thank God he didn't, right? Because he had time to repent. So he ends up dying of his wounds, but he repented before his death, right? Where he was like, I'm so sorry, I was so deceived, I hated you all, I thought blah, 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 right? And so your elder, when you submit to him, like, there's an obedience that protects you, right? Because if God really wants to send you something, he's going to, in spite of your Abba, right? Like, he will do it. But when you submit to somebody in obedience, right, then you can expose the devil for what he is, right? The devil is always cloaked with those outside eyes. The last thing, because I'm sorry this one's so long, I'm just going to cut it short and open it up to questions if you want. Where did it go? Sorry. This is going to sound cheesy, but your third duty is to love your father, right? Like, we're Christians, right? The gospel is love, and Christ said, and God, like he said, that honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with promise, right? That it might be well with you all the days of your life, that the Lord may increase you and bless you, right? Is that if you treat your father as a father with love, you will grow in your relationship with another, right? You will find that there's a reciprocation of love. You will find that the father is denying himself and covering himself for you, and the same thing for you and your father, right? Until now, I don't stop talking about the two spiritual fathers I've known my whole life. Like, I'm always like, oh, my priest in Canada, I want a Lazarus, because I only have love for them. If somebody says a word against them, I'm agitated internally because I love him, right? I love each of them. I know who they are. I know what they've done for me, right? When there's a sense of real Christian love, you can grow, just like with your kids, right? And then this father grows you, right? And grows your kids and baptizes your kids. Like the old, like it used to be like a nice tradition where every city had one church, only one church for the whole city, right? And they all, and the choice of priest was such a big deal, right? Like a huge deal. And this is even in the rites of the church, right? If you look at the way that the rites of the church are, the archdeacon announces the intention to ordain, right? He says there's a deacon response, and it's not the bishop who says it, it's the deacon, right? The archdeacon stands and says, we announce the ordination of so-and-so to the Christ-loving city of such and such, to be blah, 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 that God may give him yada, 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 yada. And then the response to the deacon is that the people sing Axios, the people sing worthy, to declare that they agree that yes, this is who we see as dad, right? We call him dad. And then the bishop puts his hand and says, we call you to the altar of God in the Christ-loving city of such and such on the altar of yada, yada, yada. That's where it comes in, right? And then there'd be one priest, one city, and that guy baptized your kids, married your children, grew them up, raised them, and then there'd be one of them would come up to be the successor. So that sense of love and discipleship is a generational thing, right? It's the key is relationship, right? In our communities and in this society, we've become extremely individualistic. But God did not want us to live individually. God wanted us to live in community. So we need to recover that identity, because if you go solo, if you go by yourself, you will fall and you'll be alone. And the devil's greatest tools, in my opinion, fear, doubt, isolation. Those are the strongest things he uses. Fear is scary, and doubt is powerful. And both of those are amplified when you have both of them when you're alone, right? If you're alone and have fear and doubt, God help you, right? It's a petrifying thing. So we have to have a sense of community, and we have to have that sense of love, so that He may dwell in us and us in Him. Sorry again, I'm always take too long. Any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms? Because it was so long. My bad. Okay. So anyone who doesn't have an Ava, your homework is to find an Ava.
How does an Abba handle a whole entire church?
Sorry?
How does an Abba handle a whole entire church?
That's a problem with the system, straight up. Like, I don't know what's wrong with us today, but it used to be like deacons could do more pastoral work than they're doing today. They weren't just just giving the blood. And priests had less work to do administratively, so they could only be pastoral. And it also used to be in the church that not every priest was allowed to take confessions. The bishop would appoint in the diocese who should take confessions. And he would also give them a rule to match that, right? So it'd be like, no, you will do no administrative. Like, you only devote yourself to pastoral care. So it is a problem. Like, it really is a problem. And so, like, in choosing, like, I probably should add, find somebody that you know you can get a time commitment from, because it's frustrating. You could have a saint as an Abba and not have access to them, and then you won't grow. And that's, I think everyone's struggling with that, including the priests, right? Like, all of us wish that we had all the time in the world to be everywhere. Like, it's brutal. So, like, I know even, like, for me, I started making decisions where I'm just like, okay, those who I have, I'm like, we have a system, and they come first, so that I can arrange my service around those people, right? Because otherwise it does become like unmanageable. And I think tell the priest what your intentions are from the beginning. Like, I know you have a whole church, so if I'm to come to you, how is this going to work? Like, what kind of access it is, right? And then it's not personal, and then you can be like, is this going to work for me or isn't it? Because if it's not, no problem. Then maybe you won't have Michael Phelps coach, right? But you'll have, like, the coach's best friend, right? Like, something like that.
You know, maybe this is, I'm sorry to ask such a personal question, but one of the things that I'm really struggling with is I've had this same father confession since, elementary school. And I think that that's really special and very powerful. And I feel like I really respond to exactly what you said about that individual. I feel doesn't have the time for me. It's hard for me to say, but I see how he's so busy, with his new church, and I really struggle with that. And I have someone that I love so dearly as my spiritual father that I'm able to go see, but the history isn't there. I imagine it would be difficult for him to put everything that I say and experience into context of my entire life.
Right.
So with this kind of scenario, and maybe there are others who.
That's a good and a bad thing, right? That's a pro and a con, right? It's a pro in the sense that you have a new set of eyes, right? Because sometimes when we have a long history, we see each other through the biases of that history, right? It's like, oh, I know Mina, he's always been like this, don't worry about it, right? But maybe this time it is a bigger deal, right? Or maybe there's something there's a complacency about, and that this new set of eyes helps. I know that happened with me because I was forced to have a new father when I moved to California, for example, right? So I missed some things about my homegrown priest, right? But I also was benefiting from some new things where this new person was like, you've got a problem with this. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that, right? Like, because I didn't. The con, like you said, is not having that history. But that's what you build, right? Like, what a lot of people don't realize is that the emotional high you get when you're in when you're in a relationship or you're doing whatever is because something's new, right? Newness is what gives you that excitement, right? And then when that newness dies, you start to suddenly feel stagnant. You want something new, right? So that's why the relationship needs to be developed, right? You're developing new experiences, right? And so you can build that, right? With, like, even for me, when Lazarus being spiritual father and post, there's a difference, right? Like, when he took on that role officially, I started seeing a new side of him, right? He started saying certain things that he didn't tell me before, right? Because now he felt responsibility towards me, and I benefited it, right? Whereas before he was just an outsider. So put work into that relationship for long enough to see if it's a good match, because maybe it's not a good match, right? Maybe it is a good match and needs time. Like even with one of the in Canada, it was a struggle to build a relationship. It's not like I just suddenly magically was like buddy, right? Like I would go and sometimes I'd leave frustrated. I'm like, he gave me an instruction that I felt was too difficult for me, but I was like, but I didn't really articulate myself well either, right? So then I'd go back and be like, when I'm going to do what you told me, okay, but I just want to make sure you understood me properly because I'm not sure if I expressed myself well. What I meant was blah, 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 right? Then I might be like, well, I want you to know that this happened. Like I'd add new facts, right? Sometimes those new facts would make him be like, oh, okay, khalas, I didn't know that. How about instead this and this and this? Other times like, yeah, I get it. Still do that, right? And then again, I would trust and submit and say, okay, as long as I got out what I needed, right? But this continual dialogue, right, made us over the years know each other so well, right? Then even he would teach me how to do stuff, right? And then a trust developed, and then he would teach me how to teach others, right? I became like almost the middleman for people who were afraid of Abuna, right? Like so he'd be like, yeah, I know, go tell him this, and bring him over. Like it was wonderful, right? That's why like today, if there's a single thing I do right in my priesthood, I know who it's from. It's not from me. Right, it's from that priest back in Canada who taught me everything I know. But a relationship takes work, right? Like from both sides. So don't be discouraged if there's not like a amazing platonic thing going on immediately. It might take work. And everyone read that book, it's really good.
Any other questions?
I do have one.
Yes.
Spiritual guide should be a priest, right? I know you back in the day, like you said, used to be against the stuff. But, in living here in the U.S., we have all sorts of spiritual guides. And some seem valid, but...
Yes and no. So a spiritual guide did not have to be a priest, like to be honest. A spiritual guide, there are spiritual fathers and there are spiritual mothers. And like there is one, now I speak about her openly, she passed away a few months ago. It's on Samira in Irvine, was a spiritual mother to me. I saw her in her everything that I wanted to be and everything that I wished that I could be like, and she was incredible. And I would go to her in the same way, and my spiritual father was aware of her. I would tell him, like I went to Samira and I asked her, how do you pray? How do you read? Because I saw in her, like we said at the beginning, everything I wanted to be. So the spiritual guide does not have to be a priest. It usually is, right? But what I would say is that at least the person there has to be a priest who absolves you at least for the sin part. Obviously that part is only in priesthood. But you can learn from anybody, right? But I would recommend that the person be much older than you, right? Like, and I'm double-edged on that. There's another monastic adage that says, eldership is not by age, right? Which is that not everybody who's old is necessarily wise, not everybody who's young is necessarily foolish, right? But to see in them, like we said, those characteristics, so that you can go to them. I would say somebody who is exemplary. In this day and age, you might have different sources for things, right? You might say, well, I can learn patience from this person, I see it in them, right? Kind of like St. Antony, before he went solo in the desert, it says he went to the outskirts of the city, right? And from this elder he learned this, and this elder he learned this, and this, like he learned from many. I would say that that's almost like having your GP and your specialist, right? So you need a GP, I think, who's a priest, in my view, right? And especially because they absolve you, and ideally they've been chosen because they have those things. And third, like we said at the beginning, is that we need somebody who has a sensor for the innovation part, right? And that is a good thing in the priest. Is that the priest might say, no, keep talking to him, no problem, I'm glad you're benefiting, right? But just be open with me, right? So that if something comes back where this spiritual guide, right, is like, I want you to do these practices that are funny, right? that there's an internal eye with the gift of the Holy Spirit, right, that can say something's wrong, right? And there's been many cases of that. So yes, you may have one, right, but make sure that you also have a priest who's in on the loop, right? And that priest should be chosen on the same specifications. If you don't trust that priest with that discernment, then he shouldn't be your priest. It shouldn't be your priest, like not in general, but not yours. Maybe you just don't jive well with him, right? Because we've seen, Yani, in recent times, not to open up sort of things, some things happened just in the last few months that was scandalous, right? Where there was a discipleship system that went awry, right? And so those to whom it was exposed were already saying something's funny about this, even though a lot of it is right, completely right, but there was an ecclesiastical sanction that kind of said something is innovative here, something in this is hokey. So sorry to be redundant, but yes, you can be selective, make sure that they demonstrate those gifts and those qualities, and make sure that you have what the church has sanctioned as legitimate in the picture as a protection to you. There's another system, to make my answer super long, in the past where a person might have a father of confession who is different from the spiritual guide, right? So you can go to the one priest and say, well, here are my sins, okay? But then there's another person who's your guru, your elder, your starets, okay? And that was a common system, especially monastically. That's still permitted, it's still allowed. It just needs to also be done with caution, and that you're not opinion shopping and being selective about who you're going to open up to about what, where nobody really knows you that well, where even though you are getting guidance, really you're self-guided. That's the only danger. And I would also say, if you want to be wise about it, make them aware of each other. I do that right now. I have two fathers, right? I have one who's pretty much my everything, but that if I can't access for whatever reason, or for certain things, I go to the other. And they both completely aware of each other and very happy about it, and there's no walls. And because I'm going for guidance, I'm totally open with both of them. I have no shame. Dush, where were you? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
Any other questions? We thank Abuna Antony, and we're going to book him for the next talk. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Abuna. Thanks for having me, guys. Thanks, guys. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We ask you, our loving Lord, that you may be in our midst and bless all of our coming ins and our going outs. Teach us how to seek you. Teach us how to deny our will, to take up our cross, and to follow you. To trust in your divine providence, to trust that truly it is your desire that we obtain the kingdom. Help us to put trust in one another and in your servants, we might live together in communion and unity, that we may be one, our Father, even as thou art one. We ask you, Lord, to hear us in intercessions of Holy Mother Theotokos, St. Mary, the great Father Antony, and all your saints, we pray with all thanksgiving. Our Father,
Lord in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever.
Good to see you. Likewise.